Let's say you want to buy a new computer and you want it to be a Mac, and you only have $400. For that amount of money, you're not going to be able to buy anything on Apple's website. So you have to look at the used market. And unfortunately, the used market is a disaster when it comes to Macs. You start looking for MacBook Pros on eBay and Craigslist, and you start seeing there's a saturation of non-Retina MacBook Pros that claim to be Retina and can get a little tricky at times to figure out what exact model it is. And you see some of those computers going for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, where you can get a 2012 MacBook Pro with Retina display base model at that time. That was a $1,200 laptop. You're getting for $800, $900, which is just crazy that it still wants to go for that price in 2018. Is it really worth those prices? Probably not, but it's just the way the market works with Apple products. So truly, if you only have $400, what does that get you? Well, today we're gonna find out, because I had $400 and then I spent it and I bought this. This is a mid-2012 MacBook Air with a Core i7 processor. This model specifically came with 8 GB of RAM and originally came with a 256 GB SSD. Now, the previous owner did upgrade that SSD to a 500 GB, which is fantastic, and it gives me more than enough space. Now, this is the 11-inch MacBook Air, so this might not be for everyone if you want a little bit bigger of a screen. But let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits you're going to get from the 11-inch compared to other MacBooks of that generation. So the first thing someone's going to notice is that the screen resolution is not the best on this MacBook. But think about it this way, because it is such a small screen, the low resolution doesn't mean as much as it did if it was a bigger screen. The native resolution is 1366 by 768, and by no means is that a high resolution today, but on this 11-inch screen, it definitely looks better than a non-Retina MacBook Pro, for example. This model does have the Intel 4000 graphics and performs as you would expect for a computer of that generation. I found this on Craigslist and I paid a whole $400 for this thing. There is nothing physically wrong with it at all, except for some dings and some scratches here and there, which is very common for older Macs. And the battery has about 80% of its life left. In all reality, it lasts 2 to 3 hours max, and I will eventually plan to upgrade that, but that's not a really big deal right now. Just to put this in context, in 2012, this MacBook went for $1,249. And today, in 2018, I bought it for $400. This is an i7 machine with 8 GB of RAM with a 500 GB SSD that can pretty much handle any type of basics to medium advanced tasks you want to do on it for $400. I would dare you to go into Best Buy and find any machine that, number one, can beat this with performance for the amount of money, number two, beat you on design or battery life, and of course you can't find anything at Best Buy for this price range that runs OS X. Now, what amenities are you missing? Well, you're not going to find USB-C or Thunderbolt 3 like all the new MacBooks, but you do have 2 USB 3.0 ports, which is great. You have your MagSafe 2, which is also a great addition. If you ask me, I love MagSafe. I prefer that for charging than USB-C. And you also have a Thunderbolt 1 port. And though you're not going to be running any eGPUs off of it, it still has a plethora of different accessories like hard drives and displays that you can still use this thing with. So the reason I really picked this up is because I thought for the money you couldn't beat it, and after looking on eBay, you really can't. Now, I never took the MacBook Airs really seriously because they've always been Apple's didn't really care about machine in the last couple years. But I always, for some reason, wanted to get an 11-inch MacBook. I remember when I was younger that the MacBook Air was so appealing. Ever since I saw Steve Jobs take the MacBook out of an envelope, and you really saw how small and versatile this thing was.
This is the new MacBook Air.
But let's talk about real performance here. How well does it do? This is where it gets interesting, because just a couple weeks ago I made my $250 Hackintosh video, and that's actually been my main driver for editing videos, and pretty much all the new shows you've seen have been edited on that. So using that as a baseline to kind of see how the MacBook Air performs, this was very interesting. So looking at Geekbench, the MacBook Air for single core score did 3005, definitely not a terrible score, and for multi-core did 5724. Definitely not bad for a dual-core processor that is still going to be 6 years old. But this is what was really interesting. My Hackintosh only did a single-core score of 1759, which is fairly respectively lower than the MacBook Air, and a multi-core score of 6460. Again, doesn't really surprise me. I was expecting my Hackintosh to do a little better, as it does have it is a quad core and has 8 threads. compared to the MacBook Air, which is a dual core and only has 4 threads. But nonetheless, you kind of take the average of the single core and the multi-core and you get a fairly equivalent machine. So taking that knowledge in consideration, I then ran Cinebench. And I won't say that these numbers surprised me, but this definitely did better than I was expecting. The MacBook Air and the OpenGL test performed just getting over about 15 frames a second, which definitely is not bad for that Intel 4000 integrated graphics. And on the CPU, it did 222. Which it kind of is where I was expecting. It struggled with this test just because there's only so many workers in the test that are working all at once, only having those 4 threads. My Hackintosh, if you remember, the OpenGL test was right around 35 every single time I do it, just over 35 generally speaking, and the CPU was at 416. So in this case, this is really taking advantage of that multi-core, and there's more cores and threads in the Xeon processor in my Hackintosh, but this still was a very interesting number. But what really surprised me was that OpenGL test. 15 frames a second, not terrible for this old of a computer. And we're talking about something that is super thin, super portable, even in 2018 standards. So the most obvious next step was to see how does this compare to a modern Mac. And though I'm not going to compare this to a MacBook Pro, even an i5 nowadays, if that's going to destroy this, there is one Mac in Apple's lineup that is a little bit underpowered and is a little bit lower spec, but still is a $1,000+ Mac. And that's the MacBook. So how does the MacBook stack up? Well, if we're looking at the M3 processor in the MacBook, which is going to be the baseline model, in Geekbench, the MacBook gets 3,522 and the multi-core score is 6,656. Comparing that with what our MacBook Air is getting, it's a pretty minimal difference. For day-to-day operations, you're never really going to see that processor difference. And though your MacBook definitely has benefits, like a much faster SSD, it also has disadvantages, like only having one USB-C port. But all in all, it's very close for a 6-year-old machine to be able to perform that way. This definitely makes it a very, very usable Mac. And to prove that, this video, as well as yesterday's news show, was edited on. 4K editing, fairly smoothly without any real issues at all. Anytime there were any issues, you can always run the media as a proxy, and that definitely does speed things up a bit. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and suggest you buy one of these things to fully edit on when you can afford to have something better, but it's definitely not bad. So there you go. That was my $400 MacBook Air. I am definitely liking this thing and I'm using it a lot. I really just like having a small computer around, to be honest, and I love the fact that this is an 11-inch. I probably wouldn't have gotten it if it was the 13-inch model. There are still some upgrades I want to do to this MacBook, one of which is getting even a bigger SSD to stick in it, maybe like a 1 or 2 terabyte, as well as replace the wireless card with just a little bit more modern, making sure we have wireless AC, though this does have Bluetooth 4.0 and has most of the features out there you're looking for, and maybe some other visual mods. I haven't really decided yet, but when you're only spending $400, I'm more likely to be messing with this a little bit more than anything else in my collection of computers. Well, let us know what you guys think. I'm closing the lid on today's episode. If you thought the $400 MacBook was a pretty good buy and find, let me know down there. Hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or criticisms, make sure you leave them down there. Thanks everyone for watching the video, and we'll see you guys next time.